Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up where I talk about all of the books that I read in February. February was like I just couldn't stop reading. So it was a really good month for me. I probably will not read anywhere near that many books in March. The first book that I read in February was Where the Red Fern Grows, which I will put here. And this was a book that I read for our friends book club. My thoughts on Where the Red Fern Grows. It is a classic. Obviously, it's really depressing, but overall, I do actually really like this book. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, mostly because I really liked the character work in this book. I thought it was really well done. The relationship between the boy and his dogs. It's a great coming of age story, boyhood out in the, kind of wilderness sort of story. The way that the author was able to give so much character to the dogs as well was really neat, and I thought that he pulled that off really well, where they weren't personified necessarily, but they really had distinct personalities, and he did a really good job showcasing that in the book. The second book that I read in February was Wildcard by Marie Lu, which is another one I will put over here because I sold my copy of it, which maybe probably tells you what my opinion of it was. This book. Okay, so I really liked Warcross, which is the first book of this duology, and I was really looking forward to reading Wildcard. But I had a couple reservations coming in from book 1, and unfortunately it just kind of fell flat. I thought that it was very kind of pieced together, and it felt very disjointed, like the author didn't really know like where she was going with it for most of the book. It was an insta-love coming in from the first book, which, as all of you probably know by now, is like my least favorite thing ever. My third book in February was The Loneliest Girl in the Universe by Lauren James. This is also a YA novel about a girl who goes off in space with her parents and a bunch of other people. Then something horrible happens, her parents pass away, and she ends up being the only person alive on this ship. Anyways, this was an interesting book. I actually liked this book a lot more than I thought I was going to. I gave it a solid 3.5 out of 5 because I actually did really enjoy it. The slight hint of romance that happens in this book, it was kind of desperate, but I actually was okay with it just because somebody who's been on a spaceship for literally like years and years, I would imagine would be a little desperate for human company in general and be really quick to jump at the chance to have any kind of a romantic involvement, especially when she's a teenage girl. The next book that I read was House of the Red Fish by Graham Salisbury, and this is the follow-up novel to Under the Blood Red Sun, which follows the story of Tamikazu, who is a Japanese-American boy living in Hawaii at the time of the Pearl Harbor attacks. I really loved the first book, and I was excited to read the second one. Now this one, I gave a 3 out of 5, not as high as I rated the first book, and that was mostly because of the antagonist, who I have a really hard time with villains that are just like evil and they hate everyone and they're just mean because. And I felt like the villain in this story was just a total brat for no reason. There was one tiny little part where they suggested that he might have some different like daddy issues and stuff, which we kind of already got in the beginning of the book, but I was just kind of like, yeah, but I don't know that you're giving me enough to understand why this kid is literally such a brat. However, I did really love going back to Tommy and his friends because, once again, that motley crew trope, you guys, I gotta have it. It's amazing. And this was good. I really liked the friends group in this story just as much as I liked it in the last one. The next book I read in February was Bloody Jack by L.A. Meyer. Now, the reason I read this book is because it was a childhood favorite of my best friend Sarah's, and she was like, Tori, you need to read this book. And she's literally been telling me that since I think we were about 15 or 16 years old. So it's been over 10 years since the first time that she told me I should read this book, so I figured it was probably about time that I actually read the book. It's about a girl who grows up in the gutters in Britain, and she gets on a ship by pretending to be a boy. She's trying to keep up this facade that she's actually a boy, and obviously as she starts getting a little bit older, this is getting harder and hard to convince people of. One of the things that I had a hard time with is we start out with this really strong, like, I can do it kind of girl character, and then as soon as there's a romance involved, poof, she's back to like simpering kind of like I can't do anything sort of feel, and that really bothers me. But overall, I did think this was a solid read. It was very interesting. It's the first one in a series. My children are going crazy out there. After I had read all of this middle grade fiction and all this YA, I was ready for a change, and so I picked up The Dark Between Stars by Atticus, who is an anonymous poet who writes very simple yet profound poetry. I had picked this up on Bookoutlet, and I had never read anything by him before. I really liked some of the earlier poems in the book. Once I got about halfway through, and if you look like in the first half of the book, I liked a whole bunch, and then as I got through the second half, there's like 2 tags, because he started getting just almost too simple and cliche. Some of the poems are just a few lines long. There's a couple of poems that are, you know, like one sentence, and then there are some that are a little bit longer. I'll just read one poem so you can kind of get an idea of his style. Too many die with a brush in their hands, a heart full of colors, and a lifetime of empty canvases. So he's got a lot of really cool ideas in this book. I thought some of them were a little too simple, and once we got to the second half of the book, I don't really know what was going on. After The Dark Between Stars, we went back into the YA fantasy genre, and I picked up the Shattered Realms trilogy by Cinda Chima. It was Flamecaster, Shadowcaster, and Stormcaster. Now, I had a horrible time getting into this trilogy, and I know that there's a 4th one. I haven't read it yet, so we're just going to go with these 3. But I had a horrible time getting into the first book. The first book was my least favorite of the 3. I didn't really like any of the characters. It takes place in a realm where these 2 main countries are at war with each other, and they're very different in their culture and the way that they approach warfare and politics and all of this stuff. And it follows some of the warriors and royalty members in both kingdoms throughout the series. There were a couple of characters that I really enjoyed. Specifically, Shadowcaster, the middle book, was my favorite of the 3. I think it's a solid YA trilogy. The world building was pretty decent. Once I got past like the first 2/3 of book 1, I really kind of got into the series a little bit more. There's some insta-love tropes in here, which just... love us some insta-love over here on this channel. I got through it, and I enjoyed some of the other characters, and I thought that overall this was a solid fantasy trilogy. I debated even putting this one on my list, but How to Find Love in a Bookshop by Veronica Henry. Now, I was like, you know what, I need to read some contemporary fiction and get outside my zone a little bit, so I picked up this book on Bookoutlet because it sounded interesting. The premise is that there's a girl whose father owned a bookshop. He passes away, and she's trying to keep the bookshop open, and it's like the stories of all of these people that have been regular customers at the bookshop for years. I would almost choose to retitle this book How to Find Someone Who Will Have Sex With You in a Bookshop, which really disappointed me because I was expecting it to be this like, I mean, there were sweet moments, but like overall it was just like... There was one couple that met at the bookshop that I really thought was cute and actually took some time to like get to know each other and stuff, which was, I know, kind of a weird concept. But anyways, I did not like this book at all. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars because there were a couple moments in it that I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. But overall, you guys, I don't know. I need some contemporary fiction recommendations in the comments. Please let me know if there's any that are actually worth reading, because I'm just getting really tired of this whole like, I don't even know. Okay, I've already done an extensive review of this book on my channel, so I'm not going to talk about this one a lot, even though I absolutely love it to bits and pieces. Brandon Sanderson's Legion, The Many Lives of Stephen Leeds. This one counts as 3 of the books that I read in February because there are 3 novellas in this copy of the book. They are all incredible. You should read them. It's about a guy who has gained so much control over his mental health condition that he is now able to create these hallucinations and consolidate very specific knowledge bases in each one, so that while he is solving cases, he can call on these different aspects / hallucinatory I can't talk, hallucinatory figures to help him solve these cases, and it is brilliant. It covers so many incredibly important mental health topics, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough. The next book I read was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E.Schwab. I actually enjoyed this book. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 star rating. I thought it was one of my favorite YA novels I've read in the last few months. There are multiple planes of reality, and this specifically takes place in London, and there's kind of like 4 of them stacked on top of each other. And Kel, our main character, is a guy who can jump from plane to plane to plane, and he's a magician, and he's one of the only 2 people left that can actually go between the different planes of reality. I thought that V.E.Schwab did some very interesting things with magic in this book. I enjoyed the main characters. I did think that they could have been a little bit more fleshed out. They felt a little flat to me. However, I did think that this was a really solid book, and I would highly recommend it for anybody who has read Neil Gaiman or Erin Morgenstern. If you're looking to kind of get into that kind of slightly conceptual, like dark, gritty planes of reality kind of thing. Alright, the next 3 books that I read were a trilogy, and the first one you might recognize from one of my book haul videos, and that is Dragonslayer by Duncan M. Hamilton. And I also read the second book, which is The Knight of the Silver Circle, and the third book I actually received as an advanced reader copy from Tor, and that is Servant of the Crown, which will be releasing on March 10th, so that's super exciting. I read the entire trilogy. First of all, I really appreciated a lot of the things that Hamilton did in this series, one of which was he kind of took it in a more classic style. It was very reminiscent of like the Three Musketeers, French style world. He had dragons. There were a lot of cool things that I really liked about this series, and I'm planning on doing a full review of it on my channel in the next few days. However, a couple of the cons that I had with this series: it is not fast-paced. If you are looking for a really speedy, fast-paced, action-packed read, this is not it. This is more world building, a lot of internal time with the characters. We really get to know them really well. I had a hard time with some of the decisions that Hamilton made in book 3 specifically. That was actually my least favorite of the 3 books. I thought that it was a solid trilogy overall though, and I really appreciated that the element of romance was almost non-existent in this trilogy. So if you are looking for a break from romance in your reading, this is a really good solid fantasy trilogy where that's really not something that is a major plot device. I do actually like some romance in my books, and I'm going to do a video about some of my absolute favorite romances in fiction just to prove that I do actually have a heart. The last book that I read in February was A War of Gifts by Orson Scott Card. It's a tiny little blip of a thing that takes place in the Ender's Game world at Battle School. Ender is actually a character in it, and it deals with a main character named Zek who comes from a very abusive home, and it's him basically trying to project his hurt and anger onto other people so that he doesn't have to deal with it. It's definitely same style as Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow, and I did enjoy reading it, and I'm glad that I did. I can see where some people would think it was a little heavy-handed. I personally did not, just because it's his book. He can write it however he wants to. Honestly, I did enjoy this book. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because of the style of writing. I did feel like there were a couple of moments that were a little questionable in here, but overall it was a good read. That is all the books that I read in February. Please let me know down in the comments what books you read in February and which ones were your favorite. I'd love to know if you've read any of these books and what you think of them. So anyway, I hope you guys have a fabulous day, and I will see you in the next video.